Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited that you've decided to join us this evening. We're going to take a couple of minutes to ensure all of our alumni, friends, and guests can have the opportunity to join us for COVID-19 and the media. I am personally elated and excited about this tonight, and I hope that you are as well. So we'll give it a couple of minutes until our attendance becomes a little more steady here. And then we will get started. Panelists, are you ready? Are you excited? I know I am.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started for the sake of time to ensure that we have a great discussion, and then also we allow for a great discussion. Again, my name is Leslie Smith. I am the Executive Director of Alumni Engagement here at DePauw University. We are enthused that you are here with us this evening for our panel, COVID-19 and the media. Our panelist moderator will be held by my good friend, who I like to call JNP, but his name is Jonathan Nichols-Pethick, and he serves as the John D. Hughes Professor in Communication and Theater, Director of the Eugene S. Pulliam Center for Contemporary Media, and Director of the Media Fellows Program. Professor Nichols-Pethick primarily teaches courses in film and media studies. He also teaches the first year colloquium and the senior capstone course for the Media Fellows Program. His research interests include media history, media institutions, and genre analysis. He is the author of the book TV Cops, the Contemporary American Television Police Drama, as well as several essays on contemporary television. JNP, you are phenomenal to work with, and I'm so excited that you have chosen to partner with us on this panel tonight. So take it away. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Leslie. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to work with you always. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel, or moderating this panel with these great people who I'm going to go ahead and let introduce themselves before we get started. So we'll start with James Stewart, class of '72. I'll let him say a little bit about who he is and what he does, as if you didn't know.
I have to correct you. I'm class of '73.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
You'll make me a year older than I am.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I was Harvard in '72. I think it's when my term as editor at DePauw began. That launched my journalism career, and I've been I went to law school. I practiced law for few years, but I've basically for decades now been some kind of editor, reporter for many years at the Wall Street Journal, and for the last, I guess, almost 10 years at the New York Times, where I'm currently a columnist, and I also write lots of longer feature pieces for the newspaper as well. And not to plug myself, but my latest book called Deep State, Trump, the FBI, and the Rule of Law is coming out in paperback on Tuesday.
And I didn't move it. I noticed the other day that my copy of Disney Wars is right behind me, actually. So I was like, it's going to be on camera. That's great. And of course, he wouldn't tell you this about himself, but of course, James Stewart is a Pulitzer Prize winner. So thank you so much for being here. Our next panelist is Pulliam Professor Deborah Douglas. I'll go ahead and let Deb tell you a little bit about herself.
Hi, I'm Deborah Douglas, and I am the Pulliam Professor, visiting professor of journalism, formerly the first founding managing editor of MLK50 Justice Through Journalism, which just received the highest award in investigative journalism with the Investigative Reporters and Editors Association this year. And I'm also a senior leader with the Op-Ed Project, which is initiative to amplify underrepresented voices in the public conversation. I'm going to do a shameless plug too. I just finished writing a book called the U.S. Civil Rights Trail, A Traveler's Guide to the People, Places, and Events That Made the Movement. It's a travel book following the official Civil Rights Trail, which was just designated in 2018. And It comes out in January, and I'm super excited about it. And I'm also a contributing writer to 400 Souls, a community history of African America, 1619 to 2019.
Well, thank you, Deb. And I have to say, Deb has been a phenomenal Pulliam professor. I've loved working with her, and I'm really sad that this is her last year of her term. But I've got a good friend now that I can talk to. Speaking of which, our next panelist is Meg Kissinger, who was a Pulliam professor here a few years ago, a class of 79. And I'll let Meg tell you a little bit about herself.
Great. Well, welcome. I'm so happy to be here. I'm in fancy company here tonight, so I'm going to do my best to hold my own. But I am, as JMP noted, class of 79, roar. And I was a longtime reporter at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. I am currently teaching at Columbia University, where Jim teaches as well. And I right now I'm teaching boot camp reporting, and my students are mad at me because I'm making them go out in the pandemic and shake down people for good quotes. But in the spring, I teach my JAM, the class that's nearest and dearest to my heart, and that is a class on investigating the mental health system. And as long as everybody else is shamelessly plugging their books, I might as well go ahead and do mine. So I just got a contract not long ago with Macmillan to write a memoir, which is based on my family. It's called While You Were Out. And spoiler alert, there's a couple of scenes of DePauw in it.
Fun.
Excellent. So thank you, Meg. Our next panelist is Ian Brundige. Ian is a current student. He's class of 22. So Ian, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yes, I am Ian Brundige. I'm a junior at DePauw right now. I am on campus. I'm the editor-in-chief of the student newspaper, The DePauw. I don't really have anything to plug other than read The DePauw at thedepaw.com.
Oh, soon, Ian. I expect to see a book from you soon. And then last but not least, Thomas Curdt, who's also a current student here, class of 22 as well. So Thomas, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Thomas Curdt. I'm managing editor of The DePauw, English and music major. But yeah, go read The DePauw. That's my only plug.
All right, well, thank you all. Let's get right down to it. I have a sort of general question to start with. And I promise I'll try to do better than last night's debate. So hopefully we won't get...
That's a pretty low bar.
I was just going to say, but we think we can hurdle that one.
So let's start with the virus itself. This is a novel coronavirus, meaning we haven't seen anything really like this before. COVID-19 is a new illness. And so there are very few experts or very few researchers and doctors who can be considered true experts or could be. It's a moving target, it's unpredictable. So as a journalist, I'm just gonna open this wide open to everybody. As a journalist, first of all, how do you think about expertise when you're dealing with something this new and this unpredictable? And how do you balance that need for accuracy with timeliness, right? And to battle misinformation, when people desperately need good and accurate information in order to make good choices. I'll just open this up to anybody who wants to start that conversation about misinformation, accuracy, timeliness, all that stuff.
Well, I'll tell you what I tell my students, which is don't assume anything. And, the famous line, I think it was from the front page, if your mother tells you she loves you, to check it out. So, we can't be like some politicians who will go unnamed and just go off half-cocked and say what they want people to think. You have to go to the experts and you look at their credentials. Mm-hmm. But you're right that it is evolving.
Well, yeah, I think this also has been particularly difficult because journalists, I often say why liberal arts is such a great education. It's because we're learning something all the time and we have to hop from one subject to another. But the result is we rarely have a deep subject level expertise ourselves. So we do have to rely on people who are experts. And most of the time, that's not so hard. I mean, I've just been doing something about Trump and his taxes, and there are experts on the tax code all over the place. But this was a new virus and a new disease, and nobody, you could go to experts and they may be experts on all kinds of things, but nobody was really an expert on this at the beginning. Anyway, I don't even know now. There's still so many unanswered questions about it. And I think there's a tendency for journalists to always want to sound like we know what we're talking about, or that the people we're interviewing know they're talking about. And there's a disinclination to acknowledge things that we just don't know. And I think that has been a problem with something like this virus, where there was a lot we didn't know. And because of that, people's lives were at stake. And so a lot of bad information coming from well-intentioned and, good people got circulating very early in this.
I agree about coming clean about what, acknowledging what we don't know. And I think there needs to be more transparency about the process of how we go about our jobs, and to be transparent about how difficult it is drilling down to the right source moment or for that particular day. But also I would question, which experts, because sometimes what happens in journalism is that we go back to the people that we know or the people that we can get to quickly. And so, especially for something of this magnitude, it is incumbent upon us to drill down and identify different and varied and more diverse sources, especially when you consider the news about the comorbidities and the disparate impacts that came to the surface shortly after the shutdown. I think a lot of people, a lot of journalists really didn't know where to go unless they were plumbing the depths of expertise in that way before we got into this crisis. And also, I would just like to say, we have to remember that individuals are the experts of their own lives. So we need to figure out how are we framing these stories, because depending on the positionality, the point of entry to the story, we have opportunities to center people in their own story and center their expertise.
Deb, I wonder if I could get you to follow up a little bit about transparency. So when we face a situation like this, like a catastrophic situation, it's often assumed that this sort of common threat will unite us, right? Now, we're also in a period of time when a lot of news outlets are coming from sort of divisive places themselves, right? We're going to call them news outlets, right? A lot of media outlets are coming from divisive places themselves. They have their own spins on things. And whether that's for good or evil, right, we don't know, right? Or ill, I should say. But I wonder if you could talk about that distinction between objectivity and transparency that you sort of alluded to when it comes to putting a particular framework around a story, because that seems to me to be a point where a lot of people might say, well, what we want is just the facts. So how do you think about transparency? Are those different things, or those objectivity? Are those different things? What's your thought on that?
It might be close. I think that I don't believe in objectivity. I think that it's a journey, a destination, but we're never really quite there. And I don't think that any individual can be truly objective, although I think the process that we engage in can be objective. When we come clean with our positionality and where our biases lie. So the process can be objective, but individuals cannot be objective. And there is a raging conversation in journalism right now about objectivity and what it really is. And if it is really a proxy for a white male cisgender default frame of looking at things. And even in Jim's own newsroom, they've been having this debate. I have a quote pulled up from Wes Laurie. He wrote an opinion piece at the Times that the views and inclinations of whiteness are accepted as the objective neutral. So sometimes objectivity is conflated with a white male cisgender default understanding of the world when it's anything but.
This is a conversation. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
There have been these raging debates in the Times newsroom. Of course, the Times newsroom now is a Zoom, meeting like this, and it's very disconcerting to see like 60 little, pictures of people and having these impassioned discussions, which I think is very healthy. But I think one thing that I've detected here is that it's not just journalism isn't a monolithic activity. There are different levels of objectivity depending on the subject. And if there was one last bastion of objectivity, I would have said it was science. I mean, we had the scientific method drilled into us at DePauw and every other college, and it was based on, you know, hypothesis, evidence, testing, proof, and then you had something at the end of that that you thought was objective truth. And now we've got a virus which has a big component of science in it, and that's kind of out the window. Now even that has become a subject of partisan dispute. Are masks good for you or not? That's as much a political question now, whereas I would have thought that is purely a scientific question. Show me the data, show me the evidence, show me a test where somebody did wear the mask and didn't, you know, a clinical trial. Now, and these are going to be questions of life and death. We have a vaccine coming up. We have people now saying, I'm not going to take it. It's not safe. It's been politicized. The administration has undermined it. They're rushing it. It's, you know, here we go again. This vaccine is going to be a huge issue of partisan divide. So not only would I second what you're saying, and there are many interesting issues there, but it's like no corner has been left untouched by this.
And I would just add to that, that's all the more reason, you know, for rigorous reporting and for us to parse all this. And I learned a little bit in some years ago, I did a bunch of stories about, of all things, chemicals in plastic. It was bisphenol A and the big debate over baby bottles and the safety of the chemicals used to make those. I didn't know a thing about BPA until I started these stories, but to Jim's point, because I was trained at a liberal arts university to be curious about the world, I learned that it depends on the rats that you use to study that, how they're dosed. There's all kinds of ways to game science, and depending on who is paying for the research. So anyway, all that to say, I think as we debate these important and literally life-threatening questions, we need to bring that rigor, you know, to our reporting and the lessons that we learned. And, you know, Thomas and Ian, you're right there. You know, you are right now learning these subjects that might not seem like journalism when you're taking a biology class or a physics class or Greek literature, but it very much comes back into play.
One thing about transparency is the notion of showing your work. And so when MLK-50 investigated the largest hospital system in Memphis, Tennessee, and their medical debt process, they were using the courts as a collections agency. When the revelations came out, we actually endeavored to show our work. Like, how did we report this story? So to bring people into the process, because it's so opaque to people and they don't know how you get anything done. And we show that to our audience.
And going back to a point that you made, Deborah, there is still far too little diversity in the ranks of professional journalists in this country, in my view. I mean, we're having these discussions at the Times, and I used to look around the newsroom, now I look at the Zoom screen. There are not many diverse reporters in there. I don't know what the count is. And everybody keeps saying, oh, we're trying, but nothing really seems to change. And I think really, just in recent years, people are starting to question things that we never did before, such as this selection of experts. I mean, I'm often looking for an expert on a different subject. Where do you go to find experts? When you start looking at the internet, you see other people who have been quoted as experts here and there. You see their credentials, you know, they've gone to good schools. But you realize that they have benefited, those experts have benefited from the long tradition, frankly, of pretty much white male hegemony. They benefited from all those things. They're the most quoted, and therefore that kind of feeds on itself. So they stay the most quoted. They're like the safe choice.
Yeah.
And I have consciously been trying to diversify the kinds of people I talk to, looking for more unexpected people who haven't been quoted so often, but people who I think are in a position to add something important and maybe a different perspective. But I have to say that takes a lot more time and effort. It's so easy to just Google somebody and see they're the most quoted person on the following subject and call them. And by the way, most of them, they're practically professional experts. They're back to you in like 10 seconds from the time you email them. Whereas you have to like reach out to people that aren't, maybe at such prominent institutions, haven't been quoted as much, and dig into their background to see where they may actually be useful to quote.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and sort of connect on a lot of things that you have been talking about as a student. I think in terms of diversity in newsrooms, for me, that connects back to a lot of the idea about objectivity as like a young person who does this job of journalism. A big reason that I'm pushed away from that idea as a career is because of the limits of like old ideas of objectivity and the fact that a story has to be told using the specific set of sources in the specific way, sort of looking through facts through the specific lens. And in having conversations with Deb or like other professors or J&P, I think that the like ideas around where you can get a story and like what information a story can hold is sort of changing, and I'm really happy to be seeing that this like new evolving idea of how we can be telling stories. And one other thing that I just thought of in terms of getting to sources quickly, that reminded me of like the COVID aspect of this whole conversation, in the fact that the reason that things were so difficult in March is because we wanted that information quickly. We wanted those answers quickly. And in March, they just weren't there. So how in showing our work can we like seek to be honest with the public when we don't have the answers or the experts don't have the answers? And that's sort of a part of the process. And can we let our readers into that process a little bit more? Would just be my question going forward.
One of my favorite books is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And what I like about it from a plotting perspective is that the family were unreliable narrators. And so Rebecca Skloot, the writer, made that a character in the book. The fact that she would go down one road and have a roadblock and then get pushed someplace else, and she was going around in circles. And so I think that we can be transparent about that process too.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the great things about, and Ian, your point is so well put, and I want you to go to work for the New York Times very soon. But I think because of technology, back in the day when Jim and I were coming up, it was a bunch of old white guys who owned the printing presses. Well, now, everybody's got this. We can all just pull up our phone and be citizen journalists, which is wonderful and really scary too, because you don't have the trusty copy desk to check not just your grammar errors, which in my case were quite a few, but also holes in logic and so just to ensure that what you're reporting is accurate. So I worry about that a lot, but at the same time, I celebrate the new voices that are coming on to the ideas marketplace.
Well, Meg, I think that's a really good point. And I was going to add that consumers of media right now play a bigger role in what they get in terms of content than ever before in history. I mean, even at the New York Times and everywhere I know of, people are obsessed with how many people click on their stories. Every time you choose a story to read or a television show to watch or a blog you listen to or something you click on the internet, you in a sense are voting for that kind of media. So in March, what kind of story do you think is going to get more clicks? The headline that says, everything we don't know about the virus, or 5 ways to keep from getting the virus. Mm-hmm. The people choose, and they're going to get more of what they pick. And so when they pick, Hillary Clinton is behind a child, pornography ring in a pizza parlor, that thing goes viral. It's like that thing got huge coverage. Whereas in the old days, we never would have heard of it. So for better or worse, we are dealing with a democratization of media that is like nothing I've witnessed before in my lifetime. And I think one thing that, we keep talking about at Columbia, and I'm sure at DePauw as well, how do you confront that as a journalist? How do you stay true to your mission? How do you, in fact, pursue, some of your goals as a journalist while getting people to read it and to click? Because if they don't, you're going to wither and die.
This actually, Thomas, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to bounce off that comment. I think when talking about looking for experts, kind of like Megan mentioned, everyone has access to all the experts they kind of want now. I feel like especially with a lot of people at DePauw, like we know how to use Google Scholar. We can find articles that back up what we want to think. So there's a real balance in not only trying to strive for showing your work in that sort of transparency, but also like Jim was saying, like you need to have a better argument and a better presentation than other people while also being true. And I think trying to balance those two things, sometimes you have to give up one or the other. And the only way to solve that is either you make a better argument or we start regulating sources. And where we want to go with that starts to become a tricky situation.
I actually have two questions that stem from, well, I have about 20 questions that stem from that conversation. I'm going to pick up on something that somebody in the viewership here has chimed in on about, and it's a long question. I'm going to try to narrow it down. But this person is asking, most of the coverage still focuses on numbers of cases and deaths and the occasional story about a person leaving the hospital. But why not more that coverage that puts death rates, risk, comorbidity, severity of cases in a better context, right? So she says, I do think the virus is serious and wear a mask, but I think too many people are overly terrified by coverage that is designed to get those clicks, to give us information that's going to make us read it rather than putting things in a careful context. And I wonder, actually, Meg, this was sort of where I was going to head with you. What do you think about the sort of, since you write about mental health, you know, the coverage and the relationship between people's own sort of sense of well-being as they're reading coverage that is in some ways designed to, in the words of this person, terrify you, if not just to inform you?
Yeah, we're freaking people out, but you know, again, it depends on, we're starting to see that this isn't just an old person's disease or somebody with pre-existing conditions. I mean, certainly that makes you much more vulnerable, but there was just, you know, there was a story that I just read earlier today about this kid from Appalachia State who was young and healthy. So, and is that an outlier? Certainly it is, you know, statistically speaking. So it is a balancing act. And I think where that question was coming from too is the trade-off between, do you close down the economy? You know, I've heard many arguments of what about the mental health impacts of somebody losing their job, and how many people didn't go to the hospital with chest pains because they were freaked out that they get COVID at the hospital. And so, you know, the fallout or the reverberations from that, those are all legitimate points. How do we cover that in a balanced way? It's, you know, it's tough. There's a lot of competition for what goes on the front page or of the website or the physical old-fashioned paper. But it's a tough one. I don't have an answer to it. I could prattle on and pretend I do, but I don't. But I just would say that we don't know what we don't know. And so to kind of get back to what we said at the very beginning, you know, I think reporters always need to keep that in mind. We are not the experts. And so go with where the people who are on the front lines, the medical community, the mental health workers, what are they seeing? And report that out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I understand the questioner. I mean, I myself find a little frustrating that when the death rate or the infection rate is soaring, then the news is on the front page or very easily accessible. And then when it actually starts to become sort of, you know, more benign, it disappears. And yet I keep looking every day for like my zip code, my neighborhood, like what's the infection rate, where are we today, how many new cases there are. So there is a tendency in the media, I think, to play up the most dramatic examples. On the other hand, maybe it's not so bad that people are afraid. I mean, again, maybe this would be a good story, Meg, but the way people respond to this information, I've seen it, the total spectrum, from people who are so terrified they're barely leaving their house, even now, to people who are recklessly indifferent and, you know, would willingly be going, well, they are. We've seen them. They're going to bars, they're partying, they're getting together with groups. They go to, I mean, there have been cases of, there were some fraternity parties where people were positive and they still went, even though they were positive. I mean, so there's a range of human reaction to all this that has something to do with whatever that fear gene is that we all have. I think all the media can do really is saying, look, this is happening. There are these cases and there are young people who die. Does that mean every young person who gets it's going to die? Certainly not. But I think it's important to realize that there's no silver bullet here yet.
Well, there's also COVID fatigue, and nobody has a shorter attention span than editors, because they pick up that the readers can only have the sustained interest for so long. So how do you manage that? And it is very important to stay focused. And the numbers don't lie. I mean, we're at 200,000 deaths in 6.5 months, or 6.5 months. So we're not done yet by any stretch of the imagination, and we've got a moral obligation to follow it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This the fear factor is real, and we have to remember that we're talking about the sort of the traditional media that we all work in, but there's a whole universe of other media out there. I mean, I rock myself to sleep at night looking at TikTok videos of people going berserk in Walmarts because they won't wear a mask. So I think that the fear factor is all of our responsibility. And I think probably a third story that we could focus on is this lack of unity that we have in the country right now. The idea that we can't take instructions is like really a new kind of thing for us, But this gives me an opportunity to talk about one of my passions, which is solutions journalism. So I think one thing that we can do to offer more value that is more rigorous and thoughtful is to talk about the how of all of these different stories and points of entry that we're engaging in our stories. And I think that if we deconstruct things and slow it down and show people how they're accomplishing things or what the challenges are, then people who are serious about their information consumption can feel less demoralized.
Adding to that, in addition to the fear factor, I also think that it's important to, and maybe this is because I've taken Deb's solution journalism class, so I think in that framework a lot. I wonder what our role is as journalists in terms of sharing the consequences of what may happen. Like, yes, on this, it's hard to look at it as a big picture, as a nation, as a state, but like even just thinking about the DePauw campus, there were 10 people who were COVID positive last week. This week there are 7 cases. That's a small number, especially compared to like the thousands of students on campus. But if that number grows, then there's a possibility of professors getting sick or students being sent home and all of these things that could happen if the number grows. So keeping a watch on it, I think, isn't a bad thing, sort of how other people have mentioned.
Actually, that opens the door, Ian, to a question for you and Thomas, and well, actually for everybody, because we have former editors of papers in here. But the role of student journalism, right? We actually have a population here on campus at DePauw, and a population that reads the DePauw, and the alumni that are watching and all around. What is the role of the student journalist in informing a population or a community like a college and its outlying community and its alums about what's happening on campus? How are we dealing with it? What's our strategies? What do you think the role of the student journalist is in here?
I think, I'll go. I think it's really hard, especially on a small campus like DePauw, and now it's even smaller because a lot of students are off campus, but like rumors spread quickly, information spread quickly, and it's hard to confirm that information when it's all rumors and people don't necessarily want to be talking. But finding those answers, getting that confirmed information I think is really important from students to let them know that we are there and listening and watching what's happening, as well as the administrators and the university itself to know that like they can't just do whatever they want and sort of cover up things that are happening, and we're going to be asking questions. Even if they can't give us answers, like we're still going to ask the questions and then print that they can't give us answers. Like we are here listening, watching. So I think that's really important and valuable. Thomas?
Yeah, no, I think we're lucky to have that sort of independence from the university in that case. But like Ian said, being a smaller staff, I'm remote, Ian's on campus. We're kind of split already as it is. Sometimes it's hard to beat the university to those press releases while still getting sources from people who will talk. So I think right now, especially, one of our bigger roles is not even being on the news before the university, but making sure that it is broken down, accessible, and that we are a source for the campus to go and find that information. So you don't have to dig through pages on the website, things like that. But also, I think part of that mission then for us right now is building that sort of base, especially now that we don't have print on campus, really getting better engagement with our social media, getting better engagement with our webpage. We designed a newsletter that's been going out weekly and been getting a lot more interactions. So I really think right now our role, especially directed with COVID, is in kind of digesting that information as quickly as possible so that it can get spread easier to the student body.
May I add an old lady thing to say?
Yes,
And that is that when I look back on my days as editor of the DePauw, I consider them to be some of the most precious days of my life. And part of that, a big part of that, was that we got to take the pulse or the temperature of the student body and bring our concerns, to the administration. Now, not being as old as Jim, the Vietnam War had ended by the time I showed up on campus. It was just ending in 1975. But I know they raised a lot of hell. We also raised some hell. But when I came back later as both a Kilgore counselor and then as the Pulliam professor, I was a little disappointed, to tell you the truth. And I thought that that opportunity was lost. Or not necessarily lost, but not taken full advantage of. I can already tell with you and Ian that you're on top of it. So I'm a happy camper tonight to see your spunk and your spirit. But I would just encourage you, to keep that energy alive, because it's a really precious position that you're in, and a very important one.
And I just wanted to congratulate you guys on the newsletter. I am really enjoying it, and I get lots of newsletters.
Oh, that's great. I think it's so, Greencastle and DePauw, in a way, they're very lucky that they have the DePauw there. There are many small communities that don't have independent journalism today. And we have here a massive international, national story in the COVID infection. And you have all these wonderful opportunities to show how that is impacting a finite world, which is the campus and your fellow students. And I think also, remembering from my days, which I also love doing it, the students are going to trust you in a way more than almost anyone else that they might turn to, because you're part of them. You're their age. You share their current experiences. I remember we didn't trust the administration when I was there, and here you've got a situation where, is COVID going to be just an excuse for them to exert more control over, the student body or something? There's inherent, tension there. And I think the students are going to look to you as a trustworthy source for exploring that.
Yeah, I would say now more than ever, perhaps with students off campus and with a community wanting to know what the future of DePauw is in this situation, the DePauw is a vital source for information. And you're right, Jim, they are in this horrible middle ground between the rumor mill that Ian mentioned, but also, an organization, a university that, like any organization, wants to make sure they're controlling information and it's working in the way that they want it to. But there's also this need to get information out there about what's happening. I couldn't agree more. I think we're at the place where we're probably needed to turn over into a Q&A session. We're getting a lot of questions from the audience. And so I did want to, and we got a lot of questions we didn't get to, but we're always going to have more to talk about than we have time. So, one question is that, speaking of experts, how do laypersons sort out the expert opinions that they see on newscasts, right? As an example, if you could comment on the experts proffered by the current administration as contradistinct by those preferred by the CDC, right? So How do we start to, as consumers of news, how do we start to sort out expertise?
As a consumer myself, I look at multiple sources as well as dig into a little bit independently with what those experts are. Like, it's very easy to do a Google search of the expert you're seeing on TV and see if they have any background biases or things that might be guiding them to say one thing or another, if you're that invested. But definitely look at multiple sources, which I think is a pretty easy thing to do when there are so many sources today.
Well, one of my favorite bromides, in addition to if your mother tells you she loves you to check it out, is to follow the money. So, when you consider the source, who's saying that this particular thing is safe or not safe, and what kind of financial ties might they have? So, look at everybody with a critical eye and consider the source.
I think this goes back to what Jim said earlier about the objective truth when he was talking about science. And whose expertise is grounded in science, really? And you have an easy answer on whether or not to believe the administration or the CDC.
Well, certainly it's been a major story recently about what's been going on at the CDC. I mean, all during my lifetime, the CDC was a respected authority that was considered divorced from politics and was rooted in science. And that's just been turned upside down. The CDC says one thing, then the next day they say somebody else says, no, that's not right, or we're retracting that. And Fauci tries to say something, and it's very discouraging to me to see a reputation like that going down the drain. But I don't know. I don't trust the CDC the way I once did. I think you have to look at the source of information and who controls that and what agenda they might have that has something to do with other than providing the truth.
Well, I think it's a values issue also. For me personally, not as a journalist, but as an individual, I look at the value system of the people that I'm listening to. Do they value Black life? I'm going to start there, and if you don't, then we really can't mess around with each other.
See you later.
I also think, in addition to checking out multiple sources, reading a majority of the article is extremely important. Like we talked about earlier, clickbait used to be reserved for funny YouTube videos, and now it's a name being thrown around for news sources frequently. So, I mean, in a world where it's really competitive to get that kind of reader space in the title, it's really easy to dismiss something based on that alone. And I think, especially for my generation, when we're scrolling through Instagram or Twitter or all these 150-word summaries of very nuanced and intense topics, it's really, really easy to form an opinion in 7 seconds about someone or their article without really digging through the content that's actually there.
This is why I like PolitiFact. They do the quick fact checks, and behind all of that, they have researchers and academics who are really grounded in these topics to generate these answers. It's not necessarily journalists who are doing that; it's academics. I bet some of them. It's exciting.
Well, that actually leads to another question that was asked by someone in the audience. With regard to COVID-19, could the panelists comment on the challenges, if any, of statistics-based reporting? So this seems to speak to the sort of idea of expertise and the role of the journalist in sort of sorting that out and representing it in a way that's understandable. So what are the challenges of interpretation and choice of emphasis in reporting when you're dealing with a large sort of statistical database of information that someone has to make sense of?
The first challenge is understanding it ourselves.
Yeah, right.
How we can help other people understand it, because like Megan and Jim mentioned earlier, we as liberal arts students aren't necessarily digging into the numbers every day, and that's not necessarily our area of study. So at least for me, having other people on the team, like Konner, I think he's in the chat, but he's does a lot of data for the paper. So not putting it all on yourself is one thing that I start with.
Well, I think data is, it's in a way, it's like any other fact. And data can be cherry picked to support virtually any point of view. I mean, it depends. What you don't often know in a story that's citing data is what data did they leave out? What context did they leave out?
Right,
Like,
there's lies, damn lies, and statistics.
right. I mean, I think there are whole courses that have explored this. And I think, at least when I'm talking to my students, Meg, if they've already decided what they believe and then they're just looking for ways to prove it, they end up being blinded to sometimes the most interesting stories. If they are truly curious, if they're asking a question to which they don't know the answer and they want to answer it, then I think they tend to be more open to a fair interpretation of data, amassing facts, and then, you know, drawing a fair conclusion. But just because something is data doesn't mean we all have to bow down and say, oh, well, that proves it. I mean, COVID, all these statistics, I mean, just to cite some simple examples that often come up, there's the absolute number of deaths in the US, then there's the per capita number of deaths, and then you can, you know, slice it into, you know, different regions, and you can come up with all kinds of comparisons between this country and other countries. Are we doing a great job, as certain people we all know are insisting? Are we the worst in the world, as some other people are insisting? You know, it's very hard to cut through all of that and come up with a really fair answer.
To me, statistics are just one form of evidence. And this makes me think of the rubric for excellence that I use with my students in my cross-cultural journalism class. It's a book edited by Maria Lynn Rios, and the definition of excellence in journalism is context, complexity, basis, authenticity, and proportionality. So you have the numbers, but do you have the voices, you know, to provide another level of nuance that explains those numbers? You have proportionality. Is it just through a narrow lens, or are you really reflecting the community of interest that you serve?
Well, and look at the polling data that's spewing out now. It's just massive amounts of data. I mean, every day the Times has this article on, you know, today in polls. They could have the hour in polls. It's just massive amounts of data coming out. And then we look back at 2016 and, you know, the polls were all, I mean, they weren't completely wrong, but a lot of people were misled by all that mountain of data. So now we have more data than ever, but in some ways that's made the journalist task even more difficult.
So we did get another question from the audience on this note. I wonder if we could, I'll just read it because it's a sort of longish question, but it says, newsrooms remain understaffed in terms of reporters and editors with math and science backgrounds, and few, if any, have science coverage advisory committees. It's fine that journalists can quote experts, but a degree of expertise is required to vet and challenge those quoted. Does this concern the panelists? And if so, what can DePauw, the PCCM, and media companies in general do to combat this? And I like the idea of what can DePauw and the PCCM do, because I have some thoughts of that myself, but I'm gonna let you all talk about that.
We used to have this expression in the newsroom that you'd say to your editor, I was told there would be no math. And so, and that's how we tried to get out of a number of stories, but that's not really an excuse. You have to, you know, do your diligence. And that means, you know, again, looking at the difference between causation and correlation, and go to the people who really do know that stuff. So that pretty much exhausts my math knowledge. But again, and I'm sounding like a broken record, but I know what I don't know, which is a lot.
Well, one thing I will say after being in journalism for decades and being occasionally in a management position is, you know, we did hire people sometimes with advanced degrees in math, in economics, in science, and they weren't necessarily good journalists. They were great in their fields, but that doesn't, if you can't write good stories, that's not going to help you. You may really know and be able to wean those experts, but it doesn't necessarily translate into good journalism skills. The flip side also is let's face it, people who have advanced degrees in math, science, and economics have many career options, most of which pay a lot more than you're going to find even at top, broadcasters and media publications. There's some popular science writers who do books that have, done very, very well, but the competition now is very stiff, and a lot of media outlets have been economically challenged. Maybe a nice way of putting it. So I think in a way it's become harder than ever. I just rely on the fact that there are people who they just want to be reporters and writers, and there's nothing's going to stop them, including relatively low pay. And they have a passion for that, and they may also have a great interest in some of these other subjects. There are people like that who turn into very good journalists.
Right. Well, the New York Times is really different from the rest of the world.
Yes, I know.
So I just want to say that a lot of newsrooms are critically understaffed, and so you're just always like running like a hamster wheel to get the work done. There's not a lot of time to replenish yourself or even really have a life, or to be a serial master of things, to sit down and read books. There's no investment anymore in continuing education and helping journalists like build up an expertise in a particular area like there once was. And so if you do delve deep into a topic, it's usually on your own steam, the steam that you may not necessarily have. And because local journalism has been so decimated by technology and so many other factors, the bench of people that we have generating the news coverage is a really shallow pool. And I will say, in terms of a solution, though, I got one of my fun newsletters today in my email. SBJ signed on to the Future of Local News Commission Act because people are starting to realize that we shouldn't have the choice between the New York Times and CNN and some AP reports. It should be close to home. It should be intensely local. News should have depth, because it's critical to this thing that we call democracy, right?
Yeah.
So I would say, if you see something about that, dig into information about that and see what you can do to support it.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear from my students too. I can't believe the workloads they start out in some of these far-flung places they end up working.
Yeah. So I think we have time for one more question. We haven't talked a lot about social media. And I think a lot of the answers have sort of moved around or sort of directly confronted that issue. But a lot of it has to do with where we're getting our information, how much time we're spending there. And so one of the questions is about the sort of the new movie, The Social Dilemma on Netflix, and things and issues about how much time we're spending with these devices, how they're affecting us. I wonder if we might think about the ethics of social media and journalism combining in the ways they have, as well as the sort of issues of regulation of these things. Ian, I think you had sort of had a nod to this question, and I wondered if you wanted to address it.
Yeah, I can start. So earlier, me and Thomas were texting, getting ready for this, and he asked me what my thoughts on social media and journalism. And I said, I feel like social media isn't the main problem. It's more algorithms and sort of how Jim mentioned earlier, it's the fact that everything we like and everything we click on and everything we look at on social media is being tracked, and that determines more of what we're going to get. So it creates these media silos where people are only getting ideas that confirm what they already believe just across every digital platform that they're using. And that makes it really hard to, when there are new facts or when things do change, get people to sort of change their mind and get people to understand that things are more nuanced than, like, it's not that being 6 feet away will keep you safe and any distance closer, you're going to get sick immediately. It's like, no, it's 6 feet away, or you could be further. Like any range of distances will affect the likelihood you have of getting sick. It's not like no mask or like full mask. There's a range of things that will help you or hurt you, and it's more nuanced than just black or white in so many situations. And social media, I feel like, loses that because it's making money off of people being interested in these ideas and siloed through social media.
Well, and so much of it is predictive, right? I mean, that's the goal. It's prediction rather than information.
Well, also it's because the algorithms are biased. Because we told ourselves on a bill of goods that, oh, these algorithms are going to take out all the bias and it's going to figure out everything and give you everything you want and need. When basically we're taking the human brain and human motivations and putting them inside the machine. So I would invite you guys, if you want to read more about that, to read Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology and Sophia Imogen Noble's book, Algorithms of Oppression. We saw last week with the Twitter story that when Barack Obama's face was served up and Mitch McConnell's face was served up, Barack's face was removed. And a series of tests showed that the Twitter algorithm is biased. And they copped to it. They were like, my bad, we're gonna fix this, but it's bad. Google, their algorithm was equating Black faces with all kinds of apes. So they decided to not fix the problem, but not code anything with any name of any ape. I don't know. They decided to just like duck the problem. So we're duty bound as a society. This is not a journalism issue, it's a society thing. We're duty bound to query how our information is programmed to produce the kind of outcomes or rancor that we experience in society today.
Yeah, thank you. So I think unfortunately, we've reached sort of the place where I'm supposed to stop. We got through about half the questions that were asked of the audience, and we got through half the questions I had prepared. So, there's a lot more to say. I want to say to people, if you have questions that you want addressed, and you can send them to me, my email, you can look me up, Jonathan Nichols-Pethick at DePauw, and I'll do my best to get people to respond to you. Because I think this is a conversation that's too important to just cut off and say we're done. I just want to say thank you to all the panelists for being part of this. This has been tremendously
brought up.
Yes.
If you want the newsletter to sign up for it, email me at editor@the.DePauw, or just DM any of the DePauw social media, and I will get you the link to sign up for the newsletter. Deb enjoys it, so you will too.
Awesome. That's great. Keep up the good work.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for this outstanding panel. I learned a lot. I've actually always wanted to be on TV with Oprah and all of you journalists, and it just never happened. But I am so, say that again?
Don't give up.
Don't give up. I mean, you said we need to diversify the newsroom. Maybe there's still time, right? But all of you gave your shameless plug at the very beginning, so I'm going to give my shameless plug as well. For Old Gold Week is next week. We will not be on campus. However, if you're on social media, we will be doing a then and now type of social media campaign. There may be some surprises along the way, and then we will wrap up Old Gold Weekend to commemorate the weekend on Sunday, October the 11th, 6:30 p.m. for an Old Gold All Alumni webcast with our new president, Dr. Lori S. White. So you will want to register for that. If you have not had the opportunity to hear from her, believe me, you are in for a treat. So thank you so much for being here this evening, and you never know, you may see me next, co-hosting with Jim or Deborah or anyone. So we'll see you soon, and thanks so much for being here. Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.